The sun was setting over the vast expanse of dusty plains, casting long shadows across the parched earth. A lone coyote howled in the distance, its mournful cry echoing through the stillness of the desert air. In this desolate corner of the Wild West, where cacti stood like silent sentinels and wind whipped through tumbleweeds with a haunting whisper, there was a ranch that earned both fear and respect from those who dared to pass by it. It wasn't just any ranch. It was called Black Iron Ranch, named after the iron gates at its entrance, which gleamed menacingly even under the dimming light of dusk. The ranch stretched for miles, bordered on one side by a dense forest that seemed almost alive with secrets, and on the other by a winding river whose waters shimmered ominously under the moonlight. It was here, amidst this rugged landscape, that the story unfolded, a tale of betrayal, loyalty, and an unshakable bond between man and beast. At the heart of the ranch stood John Coulter, a man whose reputation preceded him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as sharp as the blade of his Bowie knife. His weathered face bore the marks of countless battles against nature and men alike. To some, he was a hero, a self-made man who had carved out a life in the unforgiving wilderness. To others, however, he was a tyrant, a man whose pride often blinded him to reason. Coulter ruled his ranch with an iron fist. Every worker knew better than to question his authority. From dawn till dusk, they toiled under his watchful gaze, their sweat mixing with the dry soil beneath their boots. Among these workers was a young, stable boy named Caleb, scrawny and barely out his teens. Caleb was often overlooked by the others, but what he lacked in size, he made up for in skill and devotion. No one could care for horses quite like Caleb could. He spoke softly to them, understanding their moods and needs in ways no one else could comprehend. But today would be different. Today would mark the beginning of something none of them could have foreseen. The morning began like any other. The first rays of sunlight spilled over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The barn doors creaked open as Caleb emerged, leading a chestnut stallion into the paddock. The horse whinnied softly, its hooves kicking up clouds of dust as it trotted alongside Caleb. Other workers gathered nearby, watching as Caleb went about his daily routine. They exchanged quiet words among themselves, glancing toward the main house, where Coulter's silhouette could be seen moving behind the curtains. "Think he'll do it?" asked Ben, a grizzled cowboy with a patch over one eye. "Do what?" replied another worker, adjusting his hat. "You know, fire him." Ben nodded solemnly. Word is, Coulter's been talking to the foreman all week. Something about Caleb not being good enough." The group fell silent, their expressions heavy with unease. None of them liked the idea of losing Caleb. Despite his quiet demeanor, he was well-liked among the crew. There wasn't a single person who hadn't benefited from his kindness or admired his ability with the horses. Yet, rumors swirled like tumbleweeds in the wind, carrying whispers of impending change. As if on cue, the sound of boots crunching against gravel broke the tension. Coulter strode toward the group, his presence commanding attention. His leather vest creaked with each step, and his spurs jingled faintly, adding to the ominous atmosphere. "Gather round," he barked, his voice cutting through the morning air like a whip. The workers exchanged nervous glances before forming a loose circle around him. Caleb lingered at the edge, holding the reins of the stallion tightly in his hands. The horse shifted uneasily beneath his touch, sensing the growing unease. "I've made my decision," Coulter announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Caleb will no longer be working here. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some looked away, unable to meet Caleb's gaze, while others stared openly at Coulter, disbelief etched onto their faces. "But why?" someone finally dared to ask. Coulter's jaw tightened. "He's lazy, disobedient, and frankly, we don't need him anymore." Little did they know, Coulter's reasons ran far deeper than mere dissatisfaction with Caleb's work ethic. Hidden within the depths of his mind was a festering resentment, a belief that Caleb's connection with the horses somehow diminished his own importance. After all, a rancher's worth was measured not only by his land, but also by control over every aspect of it. And Caleb's unique bond with the animals threatened that control. Caleb said nothing, his head bowed low. His fingers twitched slightly, gripping the reins so hard his knuckles turned white. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The wind ceased its gentle rustling, and the world held its breath, waiting for what would come next. "And now," Coulter continued, "you'll show me the same dedication you showed him, without complaint." "Understood." Murmurs of agreement spread through the group, though reluctance lingered in their voices. One by one, they dispersed, returning to their tasks. Caleb remained rooted to the spot, the stallion beside him pawing at the ground impatiently. "Get off my property," Coulter snapped, gesturing dismissively toward the gate. Caleb hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding slowly. He patted the stallion's neck gently, murmuring words only the horse could hear. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing beyond the iron gates. Days passed, and life at Black Iron Ranch carried on as usual, or so it seemed. The workers rose with the sun, tending to the fields and livestock with weary determination. Horses were fed, saddled, and exercised according to schedule. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks began to form. It started small. The horses grew restless, pacing back and forth in their stalls despite having been given fresh water and hay. Their coats lost their luster, and their eyes took on a haunted look that no amount of grooming could erase. Trainers tried everything, new routines, different feed, even singing soothing songs, but nothing worked. The animals refused to settle. Then came the refusals. When asked to carry riders, the horses balked, rearing up or refusing to move altogether. Wagons sat idle in the yard, their wheels collecting dust as teams of horses stubbornly planted their hooves in place. Even the most experienced handlers found themselves a loss, unable to coax the animals into submission. Coulter grew increasingly frustrated. He stormed to the stables, shouting orders and demanding answers. "What's wrong with them?" he demanded of the foreman, his voice rising with each passing day. "Why won't they behave?" The foreman shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, Mr. Coulter. Maybe it's the heat, or maybe they're just feeling ornery." "Ornery?" Coulter spat. "They're animals. They don't get feelings." But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play, something unseen yet undeniable. One evening, as twilight settled over the ranch, Coulter decided to take matters into his own hands. He entered the stables alone, lantern in hand, determined to confront whatever issue plagued his prize herd. The scent of hay and leather filled the air, mingling with a faint aroma of sweat and fear. Shadows danced along the walls as he moved from stall to stall, inspecting each horse closely. In the farthest corner of the stable, he found the chestnut stallion, the very horse Caleb had cared for so tenderly. The animal stood stiffly, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring as if sensing danger. As Coulter approached, the stallion let out a low warning snort, stepping backward until it pressed itself against the wall. "Easy now," Coulter muttered, extending a cautious hand. "Just want to see what's bothering you." But the horse wouldn't budge. Instead, it lunged forward suddenly, teeth snapping mere inches from Coulter's arm. Startled, he stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. "What in blazes?" he began, but stopped short when he noticed something unusual. The stallion's eyes weren't wild with panic or anger. They were calm, almost calculating. And within those depths, Coulter swore he saw recognition, not of himself, but of someone else entirely. Suddenly, it hit him. An unbelievable realization dawned upon him, forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about the situation. The horses weren't misbehaving because of illness or restlessness. They were grieving. They missed Caleb. That night, Coulter lay awake in his bed, staring up at the ceiling as stars twinkled through the window. His mind raced with conflicting emotions, pride battling guilt, stubbornness clashing with regret. Eventually, he reached a decision. Before dawn broke, he mounted his fastest horse and rode out of the ranch, heading straight for the nearest town. Hours later, he arrived at a modest cabin on the outskirts, dismounting and knocking firmly on the door. When it opened, Caleb stood there, looking surprised yet unsurprised at the same time. Behind him, a small garden flourished, evidence of new beginnings taking root. "I made a mistake," Coulter admitted gruffly, "and I need your help." Caleb tilted his head, studying the older man carefully. Help with what? The horses, Coulter explained. They won't listen to anyone but you. For a moment, Caleb considered refusing. But then he remembered the bond he shared with those creatures, the trust they placed in him, and the responsibility that came with it. All right, he said finally, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. Let's go. Upon returning to the ranch, Caleb wasted no time. He entered the stables quietly, speaking softly to each horse as he passed. At first, they regarded him warily, unsure if they dared to believe their eyes. But gradually, their postures relaxed, tails swishing lazily as they nuzzled against his shoulder. Coulter watched from a distance, marveling at the transformation. Within hours, the once restless herd transformed into a harmonious unit once again. Wagons rolled smoothly down dirt roads, and riders galloped freely across open fields. Peace returned to Black Iron Ranch. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, Coulter noticed something unexpected. Caleb didn't return to his old position as stable boy. Instead, he worked alongside the foreman, offering insights and suggestions that improved efficiency throughout the ranch. Slowly but surely, he earned not only Coulter's respect, but also his trust. And so, the ranch thrived, not because of one man's dominance, but because of a shared vision built on cooperation and mutual understanding. Little did they know, however, that this newfound harmony would soon face its greatest test, bringing challenges neither man could have imagined. But that, dear listener, is a story for another time. The tranquility of Black Iron Ranch was short-lived. Nature, it seemed, had its own plans for the land and those who dwelled upon it. One fateful afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the plains, a rider approached the ranch at breakneck speed. Dust billowed behind him like a storm cloud, and his horse's labored breathing could be heard even before he reached the gates. It was Samuels, the local postman, his face pale and sweat-drenched. He reined his exhausted mount just outside the iron gates, dismounting with unsteady legs. Without waiting for an invitation, he stumbled toward the main house, knocking frantically on the door. Coulter emerged moments later, shotgun in hand, his expression wary. "What is it, Samuels? You look like you've seen a ghost." Samuels swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Mr. Coulter, there's trouble coming. Big trouble. A storm, the likes of which I've never seen, is headed straight for this part of the country. And that's not all." He hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "There are rumors of bandits moving through the area. They're said to be ruthless, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake." Coulter's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Bandits? Here? Now?" "Aye," Samuels confirmed. "They call themselves the Iron Veil. Word is they've already hit 3 smaller ranches to the east. Everything gone: cattle, supplies, money. Some say they burn what they can't take. Others claim they leave no survivors." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Coulter barked orders, motioning for Samuels to follow him inside. The news spread quickly among the workers, each man exchanging grim looks as they prepared for the worst. Caleb, too, listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. By nightfall, the ranch buzzed with activity. Lanterns flickered throughout the compound as men fortified the fences, stockpiled ammunition, and moved valuable assets closer to the main house. The horses, sensing the urgency, pawed restlessly at the ground, their whinnies echoing into the cool evening air. Coulter called a meeting in the barn, gathering everyone around a makeshift table illuminated by a single oil lamp. Maps were laid out, strategies debated fiercely. Caleb stood near the back, observing quietly, until Coulter turned to him unexpectedly. "Caleb," he said firmly, "you know these animals better than anyone. If we need to evacuate them quickly, how would you do it?" Caleb stepped forward, surprise evident in his eyes. "Evacuate," he repeated. "You mean move them somewhere safe?" "Exactly," Coulter replied. "Somewhere hidden, somewhere the Iron Veil wouldn't think to look." Caleb nodded thoughtfully, running a hand through his hair. "There's a ravine about 5 miles north of here. It's narrow, surrounded by thick brush. Hardly anyone knows about it. We could lead the horses there if necessary. And what about water? Asked another worker, leaning forward anxiously. There's a spring nearby, Caleb explained. Enough to sustain them for a few days at least. Coulter nodded approvingly. Good. Make preparations. But don't act unless absolutely necessary. Understand? Caleb gave a sharp nod. Yes, sir. As the meeting adjourned, Caleb lingered behind, lost in thought. The prospect of facing bandits was daunting enough, but something else nagged at him. A feeling he couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear. Rather, it was anticipation, as though some unseen force was guiding events toward an inevitable conclusion. The next morning dawned gray and oppressive, clouds rolling in like waves upon the horizon. By midday, the first drops of rain began to fall, turning the dusty trails into muddy quagmires. Thunder rumbled distantly, a warning of the tempest yet to come. Tensions ran high as scouts reported sightings of the Iron Veil camped less than 10 miles away. Their leader, a man known only as Crow, commanded a group of 20 or more, each armed to the teeth and clad in dark leather armor that gleamed menacingly even under the dim light. Coulter organized patrols, ensuring every inch of the property was guarded. Caleb volunteered for one of the outermost posts, citing his familiarity with the terrain. Reluctantly, Coulter agreed, assigning 2 other workers to accompany him. As dusk fell, the trio set off, lanterns swaying gently in the damp air. The forest loomed ahead, its shadows stretching impossibly long beneath the canopy of trees. Caleb led the way, senses heightened, listening intently for any sign of danger. It wasn't long before they found it. A faint rustling came from ahead, followed by the unmistakable sound of voices. Low, guttural whispers carried on the wind. Caleb raised a hand, signaling for silence. Slowly, carefully, they crept forward, ducking behind rocks and fallen logs until they reached a clearing. There, bathed in the glow of a dying fire, sat 4 members of the Iron Veil. Their faces were obscured by masks, but their weapons gleamed ominously in the fading light. One of them noticed a movement and sprang to his feet, drawing a knife. "Over here," he shouted, pointing directly at Caleb and the others. Without hesitation, Caleb dove for cover, dragging his companions with him. Bullets whizzed overhead, striking sparks against nearby stones. The trio returned fire, managing to wound one of the attackers before retreating deeper into the woods. Back at the ranch, chaos erupted as word of the encounter spread. Coulter convened another emergency meeting. His jaw clenched tightly as he assessed the situation. "They're bolder than I expected," he growled. "If they attack tonight, we'll be outnumbered. We need reinforcements." Reinforcements, however, were scarce. The nearest town lay several days' ride away, and sending a messenger now meant risking capture. Desperation clawed at Coulter's mind as he paced back and forth, searching for a solution. Then Caleb spoke up, his voice steady despite the turmoil around him. "I have an idea," he said simply, "but you might not like it." Coulter stopped mid-stride, turning to face him sharply. "Speak." "We use the horses," Caleb explained, "not just for evacuation, but as a distraction. If we can lure the Iron Veil away from the ranch, maybe we buy ourselves enough time to prepare properly." "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Coulter demanded, skepticism written plainly across his features. Caleb smiled faintly, a spark of mischief lighting his eyes. "Trust me, Mr. Coulter. Leave that part to me." Under the cover of darkness, Caleb executed his plan. Selecting a handful of the fastest and most spirited horses, he led them through the ravine, heading straight for the location where the Iron Veil had been spotted earlier. Along the way, he scattered small items, bits of rope, discarded tools, anything that might suggest a larger group was moving to the area. When he reached the edge of the encampment, he released the horses, shouting loudly and firing shots into the air. Panic erupted almost immediately as the startled animals thundered past, hooves pounding against the earth. Bandits spilled from their tents, weapons drawn, shouting curses and commands as they chased after the fleeing herd. From a safe distance, Caleb watched the scene unfold, satisfaction washing over him. His diversion worked perfectly, drawing the Iron Veil far enough away from the ranch to give Coulter and the others precious time to fortify their defenses. Hours later, As dawn broke over the horizon, Caleb returned to the ranch, exhaustion etched into every line of his body. The workers greeted him with cheers, relief evident in their smiles. Even Coulter offered a rare grin, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did good, boy," he said gruffly. "Real good." But Caleb merely shook his head, gazing out toward the distant hills where the storm still raged. "It's not over yet," he murmured. "Not by a long shot." And indeed, little did they know, the true test of courage and loyalty was only just beginning. For within the heart of the approaching storm lay secrets buried deep, truths that would challenge everything they believed about themselves and each other. The storm raged on, its fury unrelenting as it swept across the plains, bending trees and tearing at rooftops with an almost personal vengeance. Lightning illuminated the sky in jagged streaks of white-hot light, followed moments later by deafening cracks of thunder that shook the very foundations of Black Iron Ranch. Inside the main house, Coulter and his men huddled around a flickering lantern, their faces tense with anticipation. Caleb stood apart from the group, his gaze fixed out the window where rain lashed against the glass in relentless sheets. The diversion had worked. Temporarily, but he knew the Iron Veil wouldn't abandon their mission so easily. Somewhere out there, beyond the howling winds and torrential downpour, Crow and his bandits were regrouping, plotting their next move. Coulter broke the silence, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm like a blade. "They'll come for us tonight," he declared, pacing the length of the room. "We need to be ready." "How many do you think are left?" asked Ben, the grizzled cowboy with the patch over one eye. "Hard to say," Coulter admitted. "But even if half the group stay behind, they still outnumber us 2-1. A murmur of unease rippled through the group. Faces hardened, hands tightened on rifles and pistols, but fear lingered beneath the surface. They were ranchers, not soldiers, and while they could hold their own in a fair fight, this was no ordinary adversary. "Caleb," Coulter said suddenly, turning toward him, "you know these woods better than anyone. If they try to flank us, you'll be our eyes and ears. Can you handle that?" Caleb nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir." "Good." Coulter clapped him on the shoulder once more, then turned to address the rest of the group. "Everyone else, stick to your posts. Don't fire unless you're sure of your target. And whatever happens, stay calm. We've got the high ground here. Let them make the first mistake." As the meeting adjourned, Caleb slipped outside, pulling his coat tighter against the biting wind. The air smelled of wet earth and ozone, the kind of scent that signaled danger was near. He made his way toward the edge of the forest, where shadows danced erratically in the flickering glow of lightning. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twigs beneath unseen feet, sent shivers down his spine. He moved silently, his boots sinking into mud with each step, until he reached a clearing overlooking the southern approach to the ranch. From here, he could see the iron gates silhouetted against a stormy backdrop, their sharp edges gleaming faintly in the occasional flash of light. It was a perfect vantage point, but also a trap waiting to spring. Time passed slowly, measured not in minutes but in heartbeats. Caleb crouched low behind a fallen log, his rifle resting across his knees, breath misting in the cold air. The storm showed no signs of abating, its ferocity only adding to the tension already strung taut between the defenders and their unseen foes. Then came the sound, a soft whisper carried on the wind, barely audible above the rain. Caleb froze, straining his ears to pinpoint its source. There was again, closer now, accompanied by the unmistakable crunch of boots on soggy ground. He raised his rifle slowly, peering through the scope. At first, all he saw were shadows blending seamlessly with the darkness. But then, emerging from the tree-line, came figures clad in dark leather, their masks glinting eerily in the intermittent flashes of lightning. 5 of them. No, 6, 7. Crow walked among them, his presence commanding despite the distance. Even from afar, Caleb could feel the weight of his authority, the quiet menace that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. The bandit leader paused, scanning the area methodically, his gloved hand gesturing sharply toward the ranch. "They're here," Caleb whispered to himself, gripping the rifle tighter. Without hesitation, he fired a single shot into the air, the report echoing loudly through the storm. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Bandits scattered, diving for cover as Caleb's warning shot alerted the defenders back at the ranch. Lanterns flared to life in windows, followed moments later by the crack of gunfire. Bullets zipped through the night, striking trees and sending splinters flying. Caleb ducked instinctively as a round whizzed past his head, embedding itself in the log mere inches away. Returning fire, he managed to wound one of the attackers before retreating deeper into the woods. His goal wasn't to eliminate them, yet, but to delay their advance long enough for Coulter and the others to organize a proper defense. Back at the ranch, Coulter coordinated efforts from the main house, barking orders through the din of battle. Windows became makeshift firing ports, curtains torn aside to allow clear lines of sight. Workers stationed themselves strategically, covering all possible entry points. The iron gates groaned under the strain of repeated impacts as bandits tested their strength, searching for weaknesses in the perimeter. Inside the stables, horses shifted nervously, their instincts telling them danger was close. One mare let out a piercing neigh, her hooves pounding against the wooden floor as she strained against the restraints. Caleb's earlier words echoed in Coulter's mind. If we lose the animals, we lose everything. Determined to protect what remained of his livelihood, Coulter ventured outside, braving the elements to reinforce the stable doors. With each passing moment, the situation grew direr. The iron veil pressed forward relentlessly, their numbers seemingly endless. It was during one of these trips that Coulter encountered something unexpected, or rather, someone. Hidden among the shadows near the western fence line was a figure cloaked in black, watching intently as the battle unfolded. For a split second, their gazes met, and Coulter felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just another bandit. This person exuded an aura of purpose, of calculation. Before he could investigate further, a shout drew his attention back to the main conflict. A group of bandits had breached the northern wall, scaling it with surprising speed. Coulter sprinted toward the breach, rallying nearby workers to repel the intruders. Swords clashed against rifles, fists against steel, as both sides fought tooth and nail for control of the ranch. Meanwhile, Caleb found himself cornered in a narrow ravine, surrounded on three sides by members of the Iron Veil. Escape seemed impossible, yet surrender was not an option. Drawing upon years of experience caring for horses, he relied on his wits and agility to evade capture, using the terrain to his advantage. At one point, he leapt onto a large boulder, narrowly avoiding a swing of a machete. Another bandit lunged at him from below, only to miss as Caleb rolled off the rock and landed crouched on the ground. Adrenaline surged through his veins, sharpening his senses and dulling the ache in his muscles. "You can't hide forever, boy," crowed one of the bandits, advancing steadily. Caleb didn't respond. Instead, he focused on formulating a plan, a risky one, but perhaps his only chance. Spotting a loose rope coiled near a tree, he seized it and swung it expertly, catching the nearest bandit around the neck. With a swift tug, he pulled the man off balance, causing him to stumble backward into a thicket of thorny bushes. Two remained. Caleb backed away slowly, buying time until inspiration struck. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a small object, a whistle carved from bone, and blew sharply into it. The shrill note cut through the storm, carrying far beyond the confines of the ravine. Moments later, a familiar sound answered him, the rhythmic pounding of hooves against the earth. Out of the darkness emerged a lone horse, its mane wild and untamed, eyes blazing with intelligence. The stallion Caleb had cared for so tenderly during his time at the ranch now served as his ally, charging directly at the remaining bandits. Startled, they hesitated just long enough for Caleb to seize the opportunity. Grabbing the reins, he vaulted onto the horse's back and spurred it onward, breaking free of the encirclement. Behind him, shouts of frustration faded into the distance as the storm swallowed them whole. By dawn, the battle had reached its climax. Exhaustion weighed heavily on both sides, resources dwindling rapidly. Yet neither side yielded, not entirely. In the end, it was strategy, not brute force, that decided the outcome. Crow, realizing victory was slipping from his grasp, issued a final command before retreating into the forest. His parting words, spoken loud enough for Coulter to hear, left a lasting impression. This isn't over. You may have won today, but mark my words, we'll be back. And with that, the iron veil vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind a trail of destruction and unanswered questions. In the aftermath, as sunlight struggled to pierce the remnants of the storm, Caleb returned to the ranch, leading the stallion behind him. The sight of him brought cheers from the surviving workers, who gathered around to recount stories of bravery and sacrifice. Even Coulter offered a rare smile, shaking Caleb's hand firmly. "You saved us, boy," he said gruffly. "More than once." Caleb shrugged modestly. "Just doing my part, Mr. Coulter." But deep down, he knew the truth. What had truly saved the ranch wasn't any one person. It was a bond forged between man and beast, between friends and allies, between pride and humility. And though peace had been restored, for now, the lessons learned would remain etched in their hearts forever. Little did they know, however, that greater challenges awaited them on the horizon. Challenges that would test not only their courage, but also their resolve to stand united against whatever storms might come next. The sun rose slowly over Black Iron Ranch, its golden rays filtering through the remnants of the storm clouds that had dominated the sky for so long. The air carried a crispness that hinted at autumn's approach, and the world seemed quieter, as if it were still recovering from the chaos of the night before. Birds chirped tentatively in the trees, their melodies hesitant yet hopeful, while the faint scent of burnt wood lingered in the breeze, a grim reminder of the battle fought not far from where they now stood. Coulter surveyed the damage with a heavy heart. Fences lay broken, splinterwood scattered across the fields like fallen soldiers. The iron gates bore deep gouges, testament to the force with which the iron veil had attempted to breach them. Inside the compound, evidence of the struggle was everywhere. Shattered windows, scorched earth, and discarded weapons littering the ground. It was a scene of devastation. Yet amidst the ruin, there was also resilience. Workers moved about with purpose, repairing what could be fixed and salvaging what remained. Caleb worked alongside them, his hands callous, but steady as he helped reinforce the stable doors. Despite the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, there was a quiet determination in his eyes, a resolve born from the trials they had faced together. As the morning wore on, Coulter called another meeting, this time less urgent than those held during the height of the conflict. He gathered everyone in the main barn, its rafters groaning softly under the weight of the rain-soaked hay above. Lanterns swayed gently in the draft, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The mood was somber, yet beneath the surface, a sense of camaraderie began to take root. "We did good," Coulter began, his voice carrying a note of pride rarely heard in his tone. "Real good. But we can't let our guard down, not after last night." Nods of agreement rippled through the group, some exchanging weary smiles, while others simply stared ahead, lost in thought. Caleb listened intently, his mind already racing ahead to potential improvements they could make to prevent such an attack from happening again. "There's something else," Coulter continued, his expression darkening slightly. "Crow didn't leave empty-handed. We lost supplies, food, tools, even some of the livestock. I want someone out there tracking them down. See if we can recover anything." A murmur of dissent arose among the workers. Tracking bandits through unfamiliar territory was dangerous work, especially when they were still reeling from the previous night's events. Few volunteered immediately, their hesitation understandable given the circumstances. But then Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady despite the unease in the room. "I'll go," he said simply. "If anyone knows the land around here, it's me." Coulter regarded him carefully, weighing the risks against the benefits. Finally, he nodded. "All right, take 2 men with you, Ben and Jake. They're experienced trackers. And don't get yourselves killed trying to bring back a few sacks of flour." Caleb grinned faintly. "Understood, Mr. Coulter." Preparations were swift but thorough. Caleb selected his gear carefully, choosing items that would serve multiple purposes: a sturdy rope, a flint and steel for starting fires, extra ammunition, and a small pouch of dried meat and jerky. Ben and Jake joined him shortly, both clad in weathered coats and armed with rifles slung across their shoulders. "You sure about this?" Ben asked as they saddled their horses, his one-eyed gaze narrowing slightly. Crow's crew ain't exactly known for playing nice. "I'm sure," Caleb replied, tightening the cinch on his saddle. Besides, if we can catch them off guard, maybe we can turn the tables once and for all. Jake snorted, adjusting the brim of his hat. Easier said than done, kid. These guys are professionals, at least when it comes to causing trouble. Then we'll have to be better, Caleb countered, mounting his horse with practiced ease. Let's move. With that, the trio rode out a ranch, heading eastward toward the dense forest where the Iron Veil had likely retreated following their retreat. Behind them, Coulter watched silently, his arms crossed over his chest. For all his bluster and bravado, there was a flicker of worry in his eyes, a fear for the safety of the young man who had come to mean so much more to him than just a stable boy. The journey proved challenging almost immediately. The storm had left the trail slick and treacherous, forcing the riders to proceed cautiously lest they lose their footing entirely. Streams swollen would runoff carved new paths through the landscape, requiring detours that added miles to their already arduous route. By midday, they reached the edge of the forest, its canopy thick enough to block out most of the sunlight. Shadows stretched impossibly long across the forest floor, creating an eerie atmosphere that made even the seasoned Ben shift uncomfortably in his saddle. "Smell that?" he muttered, tilting his head toward the wind. Caleb sniffed the air, catching the faint tang of smoke mingle with something metallic, blood, perhaps. "They've been here recently," he observed, dismounting to examine the ground more closely. Sure enough, tracks crisscrossed the soil, some fresh, others older but still distinct. "They split up," Jake noted, pointing toward different sets of prints leading off in separate directions. Some went deeper into the woods, others headed north. Caleb frowned, considering their options. Splitting up might increase their chances of success, but also increase the risk. In the end, they decided to follow the larger group, reasoning that retrieving stolen goods would be more valuable than pursuing stragglers. Hours passed as they tracked their quarry deeper into the forest. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing them to abandon their horses and continue on foot. Caleb led the way, his sharp eyes detecting subtle signs others might have missed. A snapped twig here, a disturbed patch of moss there. Finally, late in the afternoon, they stumbled upon the campsite. Hidden within a natural hollow surrounded by towering pines, it was nearly invisible until you were practically standing on top of it. Fires smoldered quietly, their flames low but persistent, providing warmth without drawing undue attention. Bandits lounged around the perimeter, some sharpening knives, others cleaning their boots or tending to minor injuries sustained during the raid. Caleb motioned for silence, gesturing for Ben and Jake to fan out, and assessed the situation from different angles. From his vantage point, he counted 12 men, though there could easily be more hidden elsewhere. Supplies were piled haphazardly near the center of the camp, including crates of food, bales of hay, and several saddles stripped from stolen horses. "This is it," Caleb whispered, crouching low behind a cluster of rocks. "What do we do?" Ben scratched his chin thoughtfully. "We outnumber M3-1, sorta, but they've got the advantage of position. If we charge in blind, we'll get ourselves slaughtered." Jake nodded in agreement. "We need to draw him out. Make M think we're alone." Caleb considered the suggestion, then smiled faintly. "Leave that part to me." Under cover of darkness, Caleb executed his plan, using the same tactics that had worked so effectively against the Iron Veil the previous night. He lured several members of the group away from the main camp, creating opportunities for Ben and Jake to strike unseen. One by one, bandits fell victim to clever traps or well-placed ambushes, their cries silenced before they could alert others. Meanwhile, Caleb crept closer to the heart of the operation, his movements fluid and silent as a shadow. Reaching the pile of stolen goods, he began gathering what he could carry, stuffing crates and bundles into makeshift sacks. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline, and his breath came in shallow bursts as he worked quickly to avoid detection. It wasn't until he reached the final crate that disaster struck. A loose board beneath his boot gave way with a loud crack, echoing through the otherwise silent forest. Heads snapped up around the camp, shouts breaking the stillness as bandits scrambled to locate the source of the noise. "Over here!" someone shouted, pointing directly at Caleb's position. Without hesitation, Caleb dropped the crate and sprinted for cover, weaving between trees and leaping over obstacles with surprising agility. Bullets whizzed past him, striking sparks against nearby rocks. But he pressed on, driven by sheer willpower and desperation. Behind him, Ben and Jake engaged the remaining bandits in a fierce firefight, buying precious seconds for Caleb to escape. Their combined efforts created enough confusion to allow the trio to regroup at a prearranged rendezvous point, a rocky outcrop overlooking the camp. From their perch, they watched as the surviving members of the Iron Veil abandoned their post, retreating further into the forest. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them all, yet relief washed over them as they realized their mission had succeeded, at least partially. Days later, as they returned to Black Iron Ranch laden with recovered supplies, Caleb couldn't help but reflect on the events that had transpired. What started as a simple diversion had evolved into something far greater, a test of courage, loyalty, and ingenuity. Through it all, he had discovered strengths within himself he never knew existed, and bonds with his fellow workers that transcended mere employment. And though peace had been restored for now, he knew the Wild West was a place where tranquility was fleeting and danger always lurked just beyond the horizon. Yet, no matter what challenges awaited, Caleb felt ready to face them head-on, knowing he wasn't alone. For in the heart of Black Iron Ranch, surrounded by friends and allies, there existed a spirit that could overcome any storm, any adversary. A spirit forged in fire, tempered by hardship, and bound together by an unshakable belief in each other. Little did they know, however, that the greatest trial of all was yet to come, a secret buried deep in the land itself, waiting patiently to reveal its secrets to those brave, or foolish, enough to uncover it.